allegation from a confidential informant claiming that he belonged to MS-13's Western clique in New York, a place he's never lived. And with that, Trump has also argued that Abrego Garcia's tattooed hands are evidence of his gang ties, a claim that he actually repeated in the interview. But notably there, one, the MS-13 supposedly tattooed on his knuckles, that's actually been digitally added on top of the original photo. Right, something that many saw as being added to the photo to kind of translate what they said that the other tattoos actually represented. And two, right, those other tattoos, the ones that do actually appear to be real, experts have actually questioned whether they are truly MS-13 symbols, and in general, they say tattoos aren't a reliable indicator of gang membership. And so with all that, a big key thing is that Abrego Garcia has never actually been charged with or convicted of being a member of a gang. Also, then separate from that, we've seen Trump naming Abrego Garcia as a wife beater, highlighting a civil protective order filed by his wife back in 2021, in which she describes being hit by her husband. Though there, she ultimately decided not to pursue the order and has since said she only filed the order out of caution after surviving a previous relationship with domestic violence. But of course, whatever the case may be, as Rogan kind of said, the whole point of due process is if you're gonna put someone in jail, whether for being in a gang or hitting your wife, you have to prove it. But as many have argued, this isn't about defending the specific man, it's about defending people's rights. And that's also a point that the interviewer made, which ultimately led to Trump conceding that he was leaving Abrego Garcia in El Salvador by choice.
This is not an innocent, wonderful gentleman from Maryland.
I'm not saying he's a good guy. It's about the rule of law. The order from the Supreme Court stands, sir.
You came into our country illegally.
You could get him back. There's a phone on this desk.
I could.
You could pick it up, and with all the power of the presidency, you could call up the president of El Salvador and say, send him back right now.
And if he were the gentleman that you say he is, I would do that.
But the court has ordered you to facilitate that.
I'm not the one making this decision. We have lawyers that don't want to do this.
But the buck stops in this office.
No. I follow the law. You want me to follow the law? If I were the president that just wanted to do anything, I'd probably keep him right where he is.
Supreme Court says what the law is.
And so, Trump's words there seemingly contradict comments by administration officials who said they lacked the authority to get Abrego Garcia back, right? Saying that they'd be complying with the Supreme Court's order by simply letting him back into the United States if he were ever to make it here somehow. Though this is notably Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has also just said that if he were brought back to the United States of America, they would just immediately deport him again. Though, kind of at odds with that, you also have the New York Times reporting that the Trump administration sent a diplomatic note to officials in El Salvador to ask about releasing Abrego Garcia, and that they said no. Though this is notably, according to the Times, quote, it remained unclear whether the diplomatic effort was a genuine bid by the White House to address the plight of the immigrant. And with that, some legal experts suggested that it could just be giving the appearance of complying with the Supreme Court ruling, with one notably saying the note might have satisfied the Supreme Court's demands, but adding, as usual, the president is his own worst enemy in court. And adding, when you have the president publicly saying there are things he can do but is choosing not to do, I think any federal judge or Supreme Court justice worth their salt may eventually order him to do those things. Saying, I think if the president had just kept his mouth shut, the government's case would have been a lot stronger. But then, next up today, we should talk about how Donald Trump's White House is now being accused of tearing a family apart, scattering them across 3 different countries, and possibly preventing them from ever seeing each other again. So the family consists of the mom, Yoreli Bernal Inciarte, the father, Micah Espinosa Escalona, and their 2-year-old daughter. With the 3 Venezuelans entering the US last year, reportedly surrendering to authorities in May and claiming asylum. And this because, according to Escalona's sister, my brother is a 25-year-old guy, a dreamer like all Venezuelans. He loves cutting hair, he finished high school, he took courses in barbering and setting up his barbershop in Venezuela. Things got a bit tough in Venezuela, so he emigrated to have a better life. But instead of getting processed and released into the country while they waited for a court date like they had planned, the parents were reportedly put into separate Texas detention centers, and their daughter, she was placed in government custody. Then, after several months apart, the mom's attorney telling ABC that they decided to give up on asylum and request deportation so they could reunite with their daughter. But then when Inciarte stepped foot on the plane back to Venezuela, she says that her daughter wasn't there as she had hoped, recalling, I started yelling at the officers asking where my baby was. Immigration and customs enforcement officers ignored me. And as it turns out, according to the DHS, the child's in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement and has been placed with a foster family. And as for Escalona, he was reportedly transferred to Guantanamo Bay and then sent to El Salvador's infamous maximum security prison. So Inciarte, who was deported to Venezuela, only found out where her partner was when she recognized him in a social media post by Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele, with her telling ABC, I was in shock, I couldn't stop crying and yelling, and her mom adding in tears. They were shaving his head, they had him dressed in all white, and he was on his knees. As far as having any sort of explanation around this, you had DHS stating without releasing or even referring to any evidence, the child's father, Micah Espinosa Escalona, is a lieutenant of the Tren de Aragua who who oversees homicides, drug sales, kidnappings, extortion, sex trafficking, and operates a torture house. With him then going on to claim that Inciarte herself oversees recruitment of young women for drug smuggling and prostitution. But this is the entire family denies the allegations, with Inciarte saying, if it's true, release the evidence. Release the proof that we are Tren de Aragua. They took a child away from their mother and they're telling lies about us. With Inciarte's mom saying that Escalona is a tattoo artist and she thinks that DHS assumed he and his partner were gang members because of their tattoos, explaining, my daughter has a tattoo of the year I was born and the year her dad was born. She also has the name of her son and some flowers on her chest. Also, reportedly from Venezuelan documents the family showed to ABC, the couple don't appear to have any criminal records. And reportedly a review of county and federal records by the outlet found no cases associated with Escalona. But all of this is, even if the US government does have evidence that he or his partner are gang members, you have the ACLU arguing that it would need to test those claims in court before just deporting him to a foreign mega prison. And with that, you've got a top official in the Venezuelan government accusing the US of kidnapping their 2-year-old child. And as Escalona's sister put it, the American dream has turned into the American horror, which when you pair this with other recent deportations, right, the absurdity becomes glaring. Right, you've got situations on one hand where you've got US citizen children being deported to Honduras with their mothers, and then on the other hand, you have cases like an undocumented child being kept in the US while her mother's deported. And then of course, there's the Kilmar Abrego Garcia situation that we talked about earlier. For now, while we wait to see how all of this continues to play out, I gotta pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts around this news? And then I'll get to more news you need to know in just a moment, but it's been truly awesome seeing you beautiful bastards win the $500 SeatGeek weekly giveaway and use it to hit up concerts, games, Broadway shows, just y'all living your best lives. Listen, the lineup right now, it's stacked. Kendrick Lamar, SZA, Tyler the Creator, Post Malone, Beyonce, Chris Stapleton. It is a wild time for live events. And if you haven't entered yet, what are we even doing? It takes 2 seconds and next week's $500 winner could be you. And for the uninitiated, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app with over 28 million downloads. They've got tickets to over 70,000 events, sports, music, comedy, theater, you name it. And so for the first timers, download the app, scan the QR code or hit the link in the description and use code PHIL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. But then also, and this is a key thing, add code PDS to your SeatGeek account as well. That gets you $10 off any ticket and enters you for your chance to win the weekly $500 giveaway, no purchase required. Which means, yes, SeatGeek vets, right? If you've used SeatGeek before, that applies to you as well. Just add code PDS to your account and you're in. So again, scan the QR code or click the link below and use code PHIL and PDS and go make some memories. But then, next up in the news today, let's talk about some Luigi Mangione updates. Starting with the fact that prosecutors in New York are denying allegations that they are listening in on his calls with his lawyer. Right? And that accusation came last week from attorney Karen Agnifilo, who said that the Manhattan DA's office told her that they had inadvertently been eavesdropping on a recorded call between her and Mangione, and that the recording was later sent to Agnifilo. But then yesterday, we saw prosecutors submitting a letter saying that's not what happened. But to be sure, no one at the New York County District Attorney's Office or the government eavesdropped on the defendant on a live basis, saying rather, consistent with well-known practice in federal and state jails, many of the defendant's calls are recorded with notice of the recording provided to him and the person on the other side of any calls. With a letter then adding that the recordings of those calls were sent to the Metropolitan Detention Center and the government because the conversations took place on recorded lines instead of ones designated for attorney calls. With then on top of that, them saying that the number that Agnifilo used was not identified as a counsel number. But still, prosecutors claim that in any event, no member of the federal prosecution team has listened to any recording of any attorney call. Instead, saying that a paralegal reviewing recordings did encounter it, but stopped listening immediately upon recognizing the conversation was between a defendant and their lawyer. Right, and all of this coming on the heels of Friday, where Mangione pleaded not guilty to a murder charge that could land him the death penalty. Because of course he's accused of murdering United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, with the case already being a political flashpoint, but then the addition of the death penalty, it's just made it so much bigger. With places like NPR noting that it's the first death penalty case the Department of Justice is tying to President Trump's Day 1 executive order restoring the executions of people on federal death row and committing to pursue the death penalty for all severe crimes that demand its use. With Attorney General Pam Bondi even specifically saying she directed federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty in this case as we carry out President Trump's agenda to stop violent crime and make America safe again. Though also with that, you had the executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center telling NPR that referencing Trump's agenda, quote, in combination with the unusual timing in this case, suggests that the death penalty is being used here to achieve some sort of political purpose. For now, we'll have to wait to see what else comes from this, though we should really kind of just expect a trickle for a while, because he's not expected back in New York State court until June, and as far as the federal charges, to be back in court in December. But then, next up today at a different kind of news, is the gaming industry going through a revolution right now? Right, that is what more and more people are now asking after this latest round of layoffs and game cancellations at a AAA studio, while indie studios are putting out absolute bangers. But I mean, take a look at Electronic Arts, which is one of the biggest game publishers out there. Just yesterday, we got the news that they canceled a new Titanfall game from their subsidiary Respawn, which is a pretty big deal because Titanfall was one of Respawn's most hyped franchises alongside Star Wars Jedi. We have the studio saying that they're going to be focusing on just that, but either way, they're now laying off about 100 people, which actually is just a fraction of the total amount that EA is laying off, with about 300 to 400 people reportedly losing their jobs all across EA. Now with that, I'll say the writing has kind of been on the wall and came after two of EA's major